light. You never think this will happen to you. Friends face the pain of divorce due to some reasons, but because you trust and love your partner, you never believe that you will end up being another statistic, another failed marriage. But when you look at divorce statistics, especially in the modern era, it makes me wonder why people get married in the first place. Till death do us part certainly rings hollow, its meaning lost over the decades. I probably should have recognized the signs, but not because of anything I read online, be it stories, articles, or just closer observation. When you're in love with someone, you tend to have a narrowed, rosy view of the world. When you're married, have kids, a home, and have built a life together, the idea of growing old together brings you peace of mind. But I think the signs were there, and I've seen them before. I grew up in what was eventually called a broken home. When I was a child, I thought my parents' marriage was strong. They seemed to love and respect each other. My father worked a lot. His job was physically demanding and demanded a lot from him. But he loved his wife and family and sacrificed himself for what could perhaps be called the greater good. My mother returned to work when my younger sister went to school. As a child, we didn't really understand what was going on, but looking back, there were signs that I soon recognized, and that's when I understood. She didn't start cheating right away. I was a teenager when it started. My brother was a year and a half younger, and my little sister was 3 years younger. It began the way many betrayals begin. At first, it was a late return from work. Then business trips. Shower as soon as she returned home after meeting her lover. She dressed much better than she ever did for our father. And, since this was before the age of smartphones, secret phone calls, and my mother's disappearances at strange dating times. The only reason my father found out about the affair was because it took them by surprise. I found out later that he had finished work early, hoping to surprise my mother by taking her out on an afternoon date, when she announced that she would take half a day off to go to the hairdresser and do some shopping. Instead, he came home to find her car in the driveway and a car he admitted he recognized nearby. He parked at the end of the street and walked home, entering through the back door. He walked into the bedroom and found his wife, my mother, having sex with her boss, on the marital bed. My father completely lost his temper and beat him to a pulp. His name was Jim Thompson, and he ended up crawling out of our house, beaten, bruised, and bleeding. Despite their age, my father raised his children never to lay a hand on a woman. But how he was able to control his anger that day, I still don't know. Even he can't explain it. What my father quickly learned was that infidelity meant absolutely nothing in a country where no-fault divorces were the norm. Some people argue that possession is 9/10 of the law. My father tried to kick her out of the house, pack her things, and send her to her parents. Once they found out what she did, they wanted nothing to do with her. Her sister also refused to accept her. Since the house was also in her name as well as my father's, she refused to leave. My father found himself between a rock and a hard place. If he stays, divorce will not be possible. A husband and wife must live separately for 12 months before a divorce can be obtained. More than once my father tried to evict my mother because of her infidelity, but it was not a crime and she had every right to stay in the house. Yes, sometimes no-fault divorces really suck because there is a guilty party who is causing the divorce due to infidelity, and for them to leave the marriage without being punished for breaking their promises seems a little unfair. My father eventually gave in, not wanting to stay in the same house with his cheating wife. He found an apartment and moved. He couldn't find a place big enough to take all 3 of us, so we were stuck living with my mother. I realized what was happening and immediately let my mother know what I was thinking about her. She tried to explain her reasons, but I told her that as soon as I could, I would go live with my father. My younger brother and younger sister were not informed, so they simply wondered why our father left. I tried to explain this without getting into the middle. The only good thing my mom did this year was that she never stopped seeing my dad. He was a broken man those first couple of months. He tried his best to put on a happy face for his children, but even we could see that the smile was forced. Being the oldest, He sat me down one night after my siblings had gone to bed and admitted that we were the only reason he stuck around, but he would fight for custody and try to get a home if possible. Although it was a pipe dream, at the time, men were rarely granted custody, and when it came to divorce after 12 months of separation, they were required to appear in court to sort out custody and other issues. Since I was old enough to speak in court, I categorically stated that I wanted to live with my father. But since my brother and sister were considered too young to make such a decision, although the judge would take into account what they said, custody of all three of us was given to my mother. The only positive thing for my father is that in Australia, it is not customary to pay child support, although there is such a thing as spousal support. However, this is not always awarded, and since our mother was already earning well, he only had to pay reasonable child support. Unlike what it seems in the United States, child support in Australia is reasonable for the parent who is no longer living in the family, so my father will not be left destitute by child support payments. The next 4 years were difficult. I already despised my mother, and she knew it. To every man she tried to introduce as her new partner, I told him that my mother was an available woman who cheated on her husband, forcing him to leave the family home. More than once I left her in tears. By the time I was 16, we barely spoke, and I left the house as often as possible, whether it was for school, working part-time, or just being away. My father got his life back on track after his divorce and eventually met a wonderful woman named Naomi, also divorced. I supported their relationship, and she soon came to love his 3 children as if they were her own. She had her own daughter, and we treated her like a sister. Despite the heartache, I was glad that my father had found love again, although I knew he was hesitant to marry again. Naomi seemed to understand this, so she was happy to move in together, and they eventually rented a house together and formed a de facto relationship. As soon as I turned 18 and graduated from high school, I moved in with my father. I hated leaving my siblings behind, the only reason I stayed until that age, but by then my relationship with my mother had become unbearable. My last words to her were, I admit, incredibly cruel, but it was just an explosion of all the negative thoughts that I had been holding inside since my father was forced to leave home, simply because he did not want to stay married to a cheating bitch. Despite our broken relationship, she still cried when I packed my things on the day I left. I hugged my brother and sister, assuring them that I would be there and wouldn't forget about them, before I glared at my mother one last time. My experience with my mother made me cautious in my relationships with women. I had read a lot of articles about infidelity, and I knew that monogamy was my thing, and I expected the same from any partner. I had a few girlfriends while I was in school, but when I started working and earning money, I started dating, hoping to find a woman worthy of my love and trust. I met Kylie when I was 21. She recently graduated from university. I worked as an engineer while taking evening courses because, although I enjoyed working with my hands, I hoped to advance into management. I met her at a corporate event. I was representing an engineering company, and she was working part-time as a sales representative for a vendor. We hit it off straight away, and by the end of the day, I already had her number on his phone with a promise to call her. Hot date, Mark? My roommate asked. He was one of my best classmates, and we agreed to live together so the rent and bills would be cheaper. Something like that, Dave. Is this the girl you met at the conference? To her. Finally got the courage to call her. I looked at him and grinned. Fuck off, Dave. I just waited a couple of days so as not to seem too impatient. Trust me, she was very excited on the phone when I called her and really wanted to meet as soon as possible. After applying a little after shaving, I thought I looked fine. In any case, it's better than looking homeless. Even though I had a decent job, the money still wasn't that much, but I was quite comfortable. We agreed to meet at a city bar and go from there. I usually didn't have dinner or drinks on the first 2 dates. There are too many stories of women looking for free food, the man paying and never hearing from the woman again. Walking into the bar after parking the car, she was sitting on a stool and the first thing I noticed was her short skirt and her long legs. She was already sipping her drink, looking into my eyes from across the room. When her eyes lit up and she smiled, I think my heart started beating a little faster. She had gorgeous shoulder-length blonde hair, brown eyes that sparkled in the low light, a gorgeous little nose, and lips that you just wanted to kiss. She was quite slender with small breasts, although I did notice her pert butt as we chatted at the conference. Over a couple of drinks, we gradually got to know each other. Her role at the corporate gig was temporary, as she admitted that she was only hired for her pretty face to attract men to her side. She laughed, admitting it was true, but it made her feel like a piece of meat. And I had so many married men hit on me, she added. It was disgusting. I understood her point. I know my own mother cheated, but both sexes were equally bad about cheating. Out of my own curiosity, I was looking for statistics on the internet, and the fact that so many men and women admit to extramarital affairs literally dropped my jaw in shock. What made it worse was that, according to many articles in Australia, we are known as a nation of cheaters. But you were a perfect gentleman, Mark, she added, taking my hand in hers. You didn't try to inspect my small breasts or ass. You looked me in the eyes the entire time and remained completely professional, at least until you asked. My number. You were the only real person there. I hope you're free. I put my hand over my heart, raising my other hand. I swear I'm single. Ask any of my friends. She smiled and squeezed my hand again. Good, because I have a good feeling about you. I've been fooled before. We agreed not to rush things. For the first few weeks, we met for coffee or drinks. It was the end of the third night of drinks when we kissed for the first time. By then, she knew about my parents' marriage. She hugged me tightly, and for some reason, it just made me feel better. When we kissed, I just knew it was right. Having met her gaze, I was left with the feeling that she was thinking the same thing. Drinks turned into dinner. A week later, she was already in the apartment that I share with Dave. He had his own girlfriend and spent most of his time with her, so luckily he was away. After we had our last drink together, I took her hand and we made love for the first time. She was absolutely stunning without any clothes on. Like any woman, she had some complexes, especially because of her small breasts. I assured her that her breasts were perfect, that she had a fantastic body, and that I just wanted to bite her ass all the time. A month later, she confessed her love to me. I responded in kind, and our relationship has developed rapidly since then. Once she found a permanent job, we began discussing serious issues such as moving in together, buying a house, marriage, and then children. By that point, even though what happened to my father was still in my mind, Kylie had completely won my heart, and that was all that mattered. She was a joy to be around, and she admitted that she wanted more than anything to be a wife and mother. Before we got married, we decided to buy a house together. Luckily, this was before the housing boom that was sweeping Australia, particularly in Sydney. However, due to her lack of work and bad credit history, which she told me about, she could not co-finance the mortgage. I couldn't get a mortgage on my own, and no bank would offer me a mortgage on my own, so my father offered to partner so his salary would supplement mine. I didn't realize how much this would save me in the future, but at that moment Kylie was very grateful to him, and she almost cried when he told her that she was now just another daughter. Her parents, meanwhile, absolutely adored me, so when I proposed just 3 months after moving into our new home, everyone was thrilled when we announced our engagement and wedding date. Marrying Kylie was the happiest day of my life up to that point. I married a woman who I considered my soulmate, and she often told me that I was her soulmate in return. Walking towards the altar, I was probably smiling like a fool. She started giggling as I took her hand as we were both overjoyed to finally commit ourselves to each other. It was not a church wedding. It took place in a park, with a marquee nearby where the reception was to take place. Our honeymoon lasted a week on an island in the Pacific Ocean. Sun, sea, sand, and endless sex. Not surprisingly, we realized that was when she became pregnant. 9 months after our honeymoon, she gave birth to a beautiful baby girl, and 6 months after giving birth, she was ready for her next baby. 18 months later, she gave birth to our son. After 3 months, we agreed that 2 children was enough. We both had what we wanted. To my surprise, she didn't want me to get a vasectomy, just in case we changed our minds, and she didn't want me to get sterilized. She simply agreed to go back on the pill, as it never bothered her and life continued as normal. She was a homemaker and mother until both of our children went to school. Once our son started school, she resumed work, although she only worked during school hours until both of our children were in high school. Only then did she return to full-time employment. By the time we were both 45, I had become a regional manager for a national utility network. I traveled occasionally, but rarely left home for more than one night. Kylie established herself in her property career by running her own office, although she sometimes had to report to the head office in the CBD. Our daughter, Charlotte, left home to live with her boyfriend. He was a sweet young man who was already devoted to her. I assumed wedding bells were looming on the horizon. Our son, Stephen, was still at university, living in a student house close to campus. I was aware of his varied sexual interests, but Kylie and I supported him regardless of his life choices. We had been married for over 20 years at that time. I thought we still loved each other just as much as the day we exchanged vows. My eyes never shied away. Hand on heart, I could look at another woman but never considered doing anything since I had given my heart to Kylie, and I didn't want to break that trust. But I couldn't avoid it. What happened to my father has always stayed with me. I should have known better. I should have seen the signs. But when I finally realized the truth, I knew I would have to take certain steps to prepare for the inevitable. You just never think it will happen to you. Do you think she's cheating on you? Dave asked, hearing the surprise in his voice. Dude, she loves you to death. What the hell is going on? I was blind, Dave. I thought that when Steve left home, our relationship would go back to what it was before. And for months, she really couldn't get enough of me. To be honest, she got me to that point a couple of times, stating that I would faint from pleasure, and I would leave her sweaty, with a flushed face after pleasuring her all night. But I began to notice similar behavior to what my mother gave to my father. Just thinking about that bitch still made my blood boil. I haven't seen her much in the last 20 years. She attended my wedding, and it was only because my father intervened. By then, he had already married Naomi and had really moved on. He told me to be better and invited her. I didn't need to involve her, but not inviting her would have made me the bad guy. I gritted my teeth and sent the invitation. Besides, with the exception of news about her grandchildren, whom she rarely had the opportunity to visit, I had nothing more to do with her. What are you going to do? I'll gather all the evidence I can, and if she cheats on me, I'll just leave her. How will you do it? I have my ways. She's become more secretive over the past few months. I should have noticed it sooner. My own stupid mistake, but that's what I get for trusting. Once I realized what was happening, it was probably too late to do anything, so I was preparing for the inevitable. I have an appointment with a private detective on Monday morning. All I need to know is if she is cheating on me. I don't need pictures or videos, anything that will help my case. It's a pity that in this country you can't get divorced because of infidelity. While it's true, a man can protect himself if he's smart and protects himself in advance. Luckily, she waited until the kids were grown up before cheating, and there are 1 or 2 things she forgot about in our lives that might turn things in my favor. He patted me on the shoulder. I'm sorry, buddy. I really am. I took a sip of beer. And I'm sorry too. The thing is, until I get confirmation, I can't stop loving her. Maybe it's just my suspicions. Maybe I'm just a jealous jerk. But the signs are there, buddy. I was blind until I finally didn't realize what was happening. The next morning, I went to my father. Naomi greeted me as usual, asking if she could sit with him while I explained the situation. I had this look on my face that even though it was only 10 a.m., He put a bottle of beer in front of me and told me to take my time and start when I was ready. I smiled as he took Naomi's hand. They still loved each other as much as they did on their wedding day. The de facto relationship didn't last long before my father wanted her to be his wife. "I think Kylie is cheating on me." Naomi screamed. My father muttered, "Damn, again. I'll hire a private investigator on Monday. But all the signs are there, Dad. The same signs you told me about Mom. All the signs you described to me. If she's cheating, then she's definitely read the playbook about how to deal with it." But once I pulled my head out of the sand. "What do you want me to do?" I grinned. Naomi laughed, as I'm sure it wasn't a kind smile. "Dad, I will give you my house. Remember how you were involved in the mortgage agreement many years ago? Kylie never put her name on the property deeds. By law, you and I own this property, and when I leave, it will be considered nothing more than a tenant. I am giving you the house as a gift, simply by removing my name from the documents. According to state and federal laws, I can do it for free. What do we do then? I will sign a lease with you month by month. Once I end our marriage, if that happens, you can deal with Kylie. Although she will have some tenant rights due to living in the property for a long time, we will explore how you can legally evict her, with a court order if necessary. Unfortunately, due to the plan I have in my head, I will not be present." "Have you thought this through, Mark?" Naomi asked. "Kylie and I discussed monogamy and fidelity before our wedding. She knows about my mother. I warned her that if she ever cheated on me, I would not forgive her. I don't care if it happens once or 100 times. If you're dreaming with someone else, you're breaking the vows we made and therefore breaking the marriage contract. Although a no-fault divorce means I can leave pretty easily and I won't have to pay her a dime. No alimony, as the children are already adults, and there is no spousal support, since she makes the same amount of money as I do. Thank God we don't have those crazy child support laws like in some places in the States. Damn it, give some cheater part of it. My salary just because she can't keep her legs together." I took a sip of my beer and looked at Naomi. "Sorry, I got a little angry about that. I just hope I'm wrong." Back home, Kylie was in the living room, curled up on the couch, watching a movie. She smiled at me, as always. Her eyes lit up when I appeared. "Where have you been?" she asked. "My dad's. Just needed some advice on something." "About what?" "It's at work. Perhaps a new opportunity will arise. The problem is that I only had suspicions, no concrete evidence that she was cheating on me. And if she did have a connection, it was someone she didn't see every day. I knew that the days of girls' nights coming out of nowhere would be one of the last straws that broke the camel's back, but that hasn't happened yet. There were only occasional late returns from work, but I also had those. If she had any suspicion, she would have thought that I was cheating on her on those rare evenings when I was late at work. When she got into bed that night, she snuggled up to me like she always did, whispering how much she loved me. It hurt my heart to think that she was lying to me. Perhaps she loved me but needed something or someone new. If that's the case, we'll get a divorce and she can have this new guy. I've read fictional stories about wives who, for one reason or another, turned into huge available women by having sex with many men. The thought of my beautiful wife being involved in such things almost made me want to vomit. Until I had proof, I had to trust her. It's the old saying, trust but verify. So when I whispered back that I loved her, I still felt it in my heart. But the thought of her breaking our marriage vows was almost unbearable at times. The next day was Monday. I left the house first to go to work. Every morning we had breakfast together, then I brushed my teeth, and she always gave me a kiss on the lips. A real kiss, not the kind that married couples usually give after years of marriage. In the morning, it was still the same. She was beaming, saying that she loved me and wished me a good day. I almost felt guilty knowing that I would be meeting with a private investigator at lunchtime. ready to start surveilling my wife because I believed that she was now cheating on me after 20 years of what I considered a happy marriage. I was a little surprised when I met a female detective. I expected to see an ex-cop with a grudge against women, dressed in a trench coat and fedora. I guess I watched too many old movies. She noticed my surprise and smiled as she explained the process, what the services included, and how much it would cost. Will she notice if the money is transferred? No, we have separate accounts, but we have a joint account where we put money for bills and other household expenses. What makes you think she's cheating? I explained what I saw my mother doing the same thing, then what my father discovered, which my mother eventually confessed to, before explaining the current situation. How is your sex life going? She finally asked. As soon as my son left the house, we had sex like bunnies. But about 6 months ago, it slowed down again. I thought it was just because we'd gotten it all out of the system. To be honest, I'd be intimate with my wife every damn night if I could. Just because I'm 45 doesn't mean I'm no longer interested in sex. Have you noticed any changes in her behavior? Yes. They're subtle, but they're there. You know the term red flags? She nodded and I chuckled. Not enough to hold a communist parade, but there are enough of them for me to be concerned and suspicious. She explained what they had to offer. This included phone tapping, video surveillance, personal surveillance, and all sorts of activities, some of which she admitted might not stand up to scrutiny, meaning they might be considered somewhat illegal. I had to explain that this is not a permanent scam unless I completely bury my head in the sand. I didn't know if she was meeting someone at lunchtime, or if it happened when she was late at work, or if it was just casual relationships when she just wanted variety in sex. I had to admit that I just didn't know, and I just wanted to know the truth. They gave me some time to think, and they said I could call on Friday to start tracking early next week. It was difficult to refuse sex with my wife. I still didn't know the truth, but the thought of now sharing her with one or more men was a complete turn-off. I could pretend to be sick, but I chose the truth. I just wasn't interested. I know it upset her when I rejected her advances. Finally, she asked if I was stressed at work. I was really stressed about something, so my agreeable grumpy response seemed to satisfy her curiosity. She clung to me, as always, whispering that she loved me. On Wednesday, I called them, asking them to start immediately. I needed to know because it was starting to drive me crazy. I wondered if it was all in my head. It is not surprising that so many spouses who find themselves in the shoes of those deceived suffer psychological trauma from this. In the end, although I paid for their services and they did find incriminating evidence, it only took a month of me refusing my wife for her to finally show her true colors. By that time, I was reading literature every day about cheating spouses, whether men or women, all the signs of cheating, how they mislead their partner, and what spouses can do after the breakup of a marriage. I was already prepared. I started putting things into the car, and I had what was called a getaway bag. Work knew I was ready to move. I just needed to give it a date. My father now owned our home outright. No mention was made in my wife's lease. With a lot of luck, she will be on the street within a couple of months. It was Friday. I returned home at the usual time. I usually found Kylie in the living room, watching TV, holding a glass of wine. When I walked in the door, we would usually order takeout, talk about our week, maybe plan the weekend, cuddle, and then head to the bedroom. Before she started acting differently, Friday night was usually a wonderful night when the kids were finally out of the house. We made love constantly, sometimes barely stopping until Sunday. Instead, I heard her busy in the bathroom. I almost laughed to myself. The situation was so cliché, and grabbed a beer from the kitchen before sitting down on the couch. You never think this will happen to you. I waited in almost complete darkness until she appeared. I expected to see her in a provocative little black dress. Instead, she wore a bright blouse and short skirt, tights and heels. She styled her hair, put on some makeup, and jewelry completed everything. She was stunning. It's a shame it wasn't for me. I knew right away that this was so. "Oh, Mark, I didn't know you were home." I came home at the usual time. "Kylie, you were clearly too busy getting ready for what you were going to do. Where are you going?" She took a deep breath. "I'm going out tonight, Mark, with John from work." "Why?" "It's just a work moment." It was a blatant lie. I knew who he was. He worked at her company's head office. He was married, he had children, and he was similar in age to both of us. I'm not sure what she expected me to say, but the moment has come when a man simply washes his hands of the situation. If she expected me to beg or beg, she clearly didn't know me at all. She knew my position on monogamy and fidelity. Standing up, she met my gaze as I walked towards her. I stared at her, and she eventually backed down. I smiled as I walked into the kitchen. "Aren't you going to say anything, Mark?" "No." She probably had no idea how prepared I was. I guess we were both good actors. The only difference is that I didn't break her heart with all those lies. "Okay, good. I'll be back later. Then we'll talk." I didn't say anything but followed her to the door. She stopped and looked at me, looking more unsure than I had ever seen her. Whether it was a feeling of guilt or not, I no longer knew, and I didn't care. "Good night, Mark," she said quietly. "Goodbye, Kylie." She should have known what I meant, but apparently she thought I would just be another one of those men I read about who put up with such nonsense. But I wasn't a cuckold. I wasn't going to put up with that kind of nonsense. I had no interest in an open marriage, sharing my wife, and God help those men who enjoy watching their wives have sex with others. This is rather humiliating and detracts from the honor of marriage. As soon as she left, I put my plan into action. I grabbed my getaway bag and packed another suitcase, putting them in the car. I went online and thanked the heavens that everything can now be done through an app on your phone or online. We had very little debt, just one credit card each, which I paid off and canceled immediately. I paid the upcoming bills and then transferred most of our savings from our joint account to my own. I left her enough so she could pay a month or two's rent and bills. After that, she would be on her own. Possession is 9/10 of the law. She didn't own the house, and I was long gone when she realized our savings were gone too. Walking around the house for the last time, I couldn't help but sigh. So many good memories were now ruined. After grabbing another beer, I had 3 calls to make. The first one will be easy. The last 2 will be difficult. "Dad, it's confirmed. She's cheating on me. She even admitted that she's going out with another man tonight. The plan goes into effect from now on." "Where are you going?" "Adelaide. I have a new job there for 12 months. Once the divorce is finalized, I may move back to Sydney, but that remains to be seen." "Okay, son. I'll make sure she doesn't know where you are. New number?" "I'll sort it out as soon as I get there. I'll send you my new address as soon as I find a place to live. Be careful on the road and don't do anything stupid." "Dad, I'm just leaving my cheating wife." Unfortunately, both father and son sound a little sad this time. "You didn't do anything wrong, Mark. Just find comfort in what you're doing and soon you'll be able to move on. Just know that Naomi and I love you. Call your kids." "I'm calling them next." "Good luck, son. We'll talk soon." Calling my kids was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. I called my daughter first. She will always be Daddy's little girl. When I explained the situation, she started crying on the other end of the line. It made my heart hard to hear my little girl cry because her daddy was crushed. I assured her that I would always love her, but I would be gone for a while. I'll email her all my new details once I'm settled in, but I wasn't planning on telling anyone just yet. As for my son, he showed the stoicism one would expect from any young man. He called his mother a cheater, and the only question he had for me was what I was going to do about it. "I'll find out where he lives and send this to his wife," I admitted. "She deserves to know the truth. Besides, I have no desire for revenge, Steve. This is not fiction. This is real life. I'm heartbroken right now, but all I'm going to do is wait for the divorce and then somehow rearrange my life. I'm only 45, 46 when the divorce is finalized. What about counseling? Can she request it? Marriage isn't the same here, and neither are the divorce laws. Steve, you've read too many stories based on the laws of the states. As long as we've been separated for 12 months, I can file for divorce. Since you're both over 18, I don't even have to be present in court, although I will be there to make sure everything goes smoothly. She cannot demand counseling since we have been married for 20 years. Well, I'd be careful, Dad. You know how trials can happen, if she makes her case convincingly enough. Then I'll just present my evidence to the counselor, put the pictures in front of them, and ask them if they will stay married to the woman who deceived them. Okay, Dad? Well, take care of yourself and keep me posted when you get settled into your new place. I think Mom will come see me. She knows Lottie will protect you. Thanks, Steve. Talk to you soon. And that's it. I wrote Kylie a short letter explaining that I was leaving and that she would hear from my father soon. I didn't explain why. I left it as a little surprise. In addition, I explained that I had already called our children and told them the truth, just like my father. She could tell her parents that I left, but if I started receiving insults or requests for reconciliation, I would send them proof. My last act was to take off my wedding ring and put it on the coffee table along with the letter and all the evidence. These were copies as I would keep the originals in case I needed to use them for any reason. As I got into the car, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but I felt all the stress I was feeling melt away as I drove away from home. I booked a hotel room on the western outskirts of the city in preparation for my trip to Adelaide. I had 2 weeks to get there and get my life organized, so I took my time, thinking I'd be staying in a few country towns that tend to have little more than a pub, a post office, and a police station, usually all in one building. I arrived in Adelaide a week later. Arriving at the office where I would be working, I was greeted by several people I recognized from previous corporate conferences. I already knew my responsibilities, so knowing that I was a stranger in their city, they took me out and showed me around, suggesting areas to consider for housing. I lived in a hotel for a month while I organized a place to live. I ended up choosing a modern 3-bedroom apartment in North Adelaide after doing my research and finding out that it was one of the best areas in the city. I am not interested in purchasing as the average price was high, although not the same as in Sydney. My goal is to eventually return home to Sydney after 12 months. After I settled in and changed my number, I informed my father, siblings, and children about my new circumstances. Charlotte immediately called, wanting to come visit. I missed her terribly, having arranged for her to fly for a month. My son was finishing his studies, but since Christmas was only 3 months away, he would come to see me then, as he could stay for a few weeks. As for my father, he kept me updated on what was going on with Kylie. Do you know she didn't come home until the next morning? Yeah, I didn't cancel the private detectives until the next day because I was wondering what she was doing that night. They went out to dinner, and it was quite romantic. Then they spent the night at a hotel in the city. I didn't need to know anything else. I thanked them for their efforts and paid them, as their services were no longer needed after that. Well, I heard through third parties and also from her. She came home to find your engagement ring, your letter, and evidence. She called me, your children, and her family, being hysterical. You obviously didn't answer the phone, and I know she sent you emails. Any call from her went to voicemail and was deleted. I marked any email from her as spam. Well, that was just the beginning of her problems. I showed up at her door a week later and showed her the lease we signed. Then I showed her the papers that you gave me at the house. Her face went pale when she realized that everything is completely legal. I've given her 3 months to find suitable housing, and if she doesn't leave, I'll call the police to evict her. She's still living there, but I know she's looking for a place to move. Did she ask about me? Of course. She asked your family, your children, your friends, even your place of work. The guilt eats her up because she ruined 20 years of marriage. Did she explain to anyone why? Not really. Of course she apologizes, but I heard the same nonsense from your mother. She apologized for getting caught, not for cheating on me. Cheaters always live in a fantasy world where they believe they didn't do anything wrong. The usual nonsense that it was just sex. I never broke our marriage for just sex, and believe me, from my 30s until my early 40s, I received many proposals. But I loved my wife and would never break our vows. I got a second chance with Naomi. Mark, give yourself time to heal, time to grieve your marriage, and when you're ready, open your heart to someone else. There are millions of good women in the world. Thank you, Dad. Love you, son. Take care of yourself. I was immersed in work and became distracted. I began traveling around South Australia, visiting various shops and suppliers, while using every weekend to explore different regions, especially the Barossa Valley. I discovered that my divorce made me a tough negotiator, unwilling to give an inch unless it benefited my company. At least my bosses were happy with my work and had already talked to me about the possibility of staying in Adelaide permanently. My daughter came to me a month after I settled into the apartment, waiting for her at the airport, where she shouted, "Daddy," and ran to me, hugging me tightly and spinning around. She immediately began to cry, whispering how much I was dear to her, and that after everything that had happened, I would be home again forever. She stayed with me for a week, and although I worked from home most of the time. But when I had a free minute, we chatted about everything under the sun. She told me that her mother had bombarded her with calls trying to explain her side of the story. Although I didn't want to show her the evidence, I finally gave in and showed her the report I had printed out. When she finished reading, she was in a flood of tears and almost growling with hatred for her mother. That wasn't my goal, but despite my insistence that her mother still loved her, I had a bad feeling that it would take her a long time to forgive her, if ever. The day she left was painful for both of us, as I knew she wanted to stay with me just to keep me company. I hugged her goodbye for what seemed like hours before she had to leave. I could barely hold back my tears during those months as my marriage was crumbling. I was angry, but not upset. I have to admit, I had to cry in the car for a few minutes after my daughter left. It made me realize that I feel quite alone. But her visit also inspired me. I talked to her every evening. My son called me at least once every couple of days. My brothers and sisters knew what happened. My little sister promised to come as soon as she could. My father kept me informed of everything that was happening. Even the guys from my old office in Sydney seemed to know some things, but mostly they just called to chat and make me laugh. 6 weeks before Christmas, lightning struck again. I was walking along the aisles of the supermarket, terribly bored. Grocery shopping was always an activity that Kylie and I did together. We made each other laugh, we were silly, and it was always a good experience. I was reaching for a bottle of salad dressing, not noticing that the woman was reaching for the same bottle. Our hands collided, and we both turned and looked at each other. I'm sure my jaw dropped slightly when her cheeks instantly turned red. "Sorry," I said. "No, it's my fault. I didn't notice you. Please take the bottle. I can choose something else." "I can't just take it. It's the last one." I don't know where the confidence for the following words came from. "Well, take the bottle if you agree to have coffee with me later." I didn't know who she was, her name or anything, but that touch sparked something in me. And just based on the way she looked, I wanted to get to know her better. I extended my hand. "I'm Mark." She smiled as she shook my hand, noting how soft the skin of her hand was. "I'm Jennifer. Do you often meet women in supermarkets, Mark?" "No, you first." "And are you sure I'm free?" "If not, I'll cancel my invitation. If so, I hope you say yes." She was a brunette. Her hair went down almost to her shoulders. Her bright blue eyes were hidden behind a pair of thin black glasses that sat on her cute little nose. Her lips were full but real, a face of classical beauty. I didn't know her age. I wanted to appreciate her figure, but I restrained myself, although I guessed that she was 6 inches shorter than me. I don't know what she thought of me in response, but the smile suggested that she liked what she saw. "I'd like to have some coffee. Why don't you give me your number?" After I gave her my number, she sent me a message. "I'll finish shopping in about half an hour, then I'll really need to get it all home. But I can meet you in a couple hours if you want." "Are you local?" "Yes. I live nearby. What about you?" "Same thing. I hate traveling far just to shop. Tell me where you are, and I will meet you there." As she pushed her cart forward, she placed her hand on my forearm. "See you soon, Mark. I haven't been on a coffee date in a long time." I heard the bell and met her gaze. I saw pain, just like in my eyes when I looked in the mirror. "I'll text you when I get home and tell you where we'll meet." After rushing through the rest of my shopping, I used self-checkout and literally raced home, throwing everything in the refrigerator or cabinets before showering and changing. Before I left, I sent Jennifer a message asking if she liked the nearby coffee shop that I've become accustomed to since moving to the area. She responded a couple of minutes later, admitting that she also frequented this coffee shop and wondering if we had seen each other before. I admit I was a little nervous as I waited for her to arrive. I had dated my wife throughout our marriage, but this was my first real date in over 20 years. She entered, also changed, into an incredibly beautiful sunny dress that emphasized her figure, and the bright pattern only accentuated her feminine forms. Her bust was impressive, and she had beautiful legs. Standing up to greet her, I kissed her on the cheek and was surprised when she briefly hugged me. After ordering her a drink, we just started getting to know each other better. She admitted that she admired my confidence when I asked her out on a date in a busy supermarket. Then she added, "But when you touched my hand, Mark, I felt something." So it wasn't just me. She blushed but nodded. "No, I often read about such things, but I thought it was just fantasy." She held out her hand to me and took it, and we smiled as I held her hand in mine. "I just felt it again," she whispered. I felt it too. We didn't go too deep into the story, not on our first date. I learned her name, that she was available, and she smiled, showing me her left hand, although it was obvious that there had once been a ring on that third finger. She was a kindergarten teacher, but had no children of her own. She lived in a small apartment alone. She had several close friends. Her parents lived in the city. She had a younger sister, and she was 35 years old. "Oh," I said, "I'm, 45. I don't care how old you are, Mark. I care what kind of person you are." When she said this, I admitted that I had separated from my wife. Noticing the nervous look on her face, I sighed and asked if she wanted another drink since it would take some explaining. I didn't want to tell her everything at the first meeting, but if it was necessary. She made me smile when she said, "No, Mark, I'll trust you for now. I can see you're suffering. So is it noticeable?" I saw the same look in the mirror when he broke my heart. She took my hand again and squeezed. It gets easier over time, but at first it's day by day. Then it's weeks and months, and soon the person who broke your heart ceases to matter. She smiled at me again. "And then maybe you'll meet the right person who can start to heal that heart. It happens to some later, but it happens eventually." My father said the same thing. Your father is a wise man. We finished our second drink and headed outside. Walking to her car, there was that awkward moment, not knowing whether to kiss her, hug her, or just wish her luck. When I hugged her, part of me didn't want to let go. I couldn't imagine finding someone I liked again so quickly. I think we were both reluctant to break the hug. "Call me this week, Mark. I'd like to talk to you again." "What about tonight?" She laughed, and it was like a blow to the heart. "You can call me whenever you want." I called her that night and then every night. I didn't want to interfere with her regular week as a teacher, but I asked if she would like to go out to dinner on Friday night. When she said she would be glad, I literally danced around the apartment after I hung up. I haven't felt such joy for a long time. At the conference on Thursday, more than one person commented on my cheerful mood. Everyone knew about my divorce, so they immediately assumed that I had met someone. I didn't want to smooth things over, but I told them that I enjoyed the coffee date and that I would be having dinner with the same lady next Friday. I added that I'm not interested in casual dating. I date one woman at a time. If it doesn't work, I'll try again with someone else. The restaurant I chose had rave reviews online, but I had never been there. It was a casual place, but the food was said to be excellent. Even though it was a casual place, I still wore slacks instead of jeans, a long-sleeve button-down shirt, leather shoes, and some cologne, although I did leave some stubble on. There was a bar in the restaurant, and I smiled when I saw Jennifer already there waiting for me. Noticing me approaching, she stood up, and without hesitation, I leaned down to kiss her. She kissed me back immediately as I held her close, feeling her hand on the back of my head. "Wow," she whispered when we pulled away from each other. "If you greet me like that on the second date." I wanted to do it at the end of the first. The waiter came over to show us to our table. Luckily, we got a small, semicircular buffet so we could sit next to each other. After ordering drinks, we continued to chat about our week. It was impossible not to notice how passionately she talked about teaching, but when she admitted that she wanted to have her own children, I began to talk about mine. I think they were both annoyed when the waiter came back asking about our order, as it disrupted our conversation. We agreed to split an appetizer and dessert, but ordered a main course for each. It was surprisingly easy for me to carry on a conversation. I was fascinated by her face, voice, and manners. Pretty sure she noticed me looking at her more than once because she blushed every time. The food was excellent, no complaints, and the waiters and waitresses were attentive without being overly intrusive. After dinner I paid, although she offered to split the bill. Then I asked if she wanted another drink. She agreed immediately, taking me by the hand and leading me to a bar that I noticed on the internet. It was a quiet place. The man at the piano provided background music. There were more buffets. Jennifer enjoyed a cocktail, and I enjoyed a bourbon with a mixer. "What happened, Mark?" she finally asked. I told her everything. How did we meet? Our life together. Our children. Our careers. But then I explained what happened to my father, my relationship with my mother, their divorce, and what I learned. Then I slowly realized that my wife was doing the same thing. Then I confessed how I left, what I did weeks before all this. I'm still married, Jennifer, but we're separated. I moved here to make sure the divorce went through. I'm not sure if you think what I'm doing is cheating. I won't be offended if you think so. But my marriage is over. It exists only on paper. I will return to Sydney to make sure that the divorce takes place. What if you meet someone here? Then I'll discuss our options with them. My kids are in Sydney. It's hard being so far away from them. I had to turn away. Admitting it upset me. I really miss them every day. She put her finger on my cheek to make me look at her. Then she kissed me, and I felt better. Hugging me, she put her hand on my chest, resting her head on my shoulder. My ex-husband was a scoundrel, Mark. He won me when I was 19. He was 25. The age difference didn't bother me, but my parents warned me against him. But I was in love and didn't listen to them. I didn't see red flags that appeared within a couple of months. I was surprised that he allowed me to work, but that was all I was allowed to do. Gradually but surely, he isolated me from my family and friends. I had to teach at school, and then go home and be his maid and available girlfriend. She paused, and my stomach dropped, knowing that this was only the beginning of the story. Stroking her side, she pressed herself closer to me. I'm guessing it's gotten worse. He began to spank me for any, even imaginary, offense. I objected to him, which meant I didn't respect my husband. I dressed like I was easily accessible or came home late, which meant I was cheating. I spent money on what I wanted, which meant I was financially irresponsible. He never said anything positive. He was a sea of absolute negativity. I can't imagine wanting to say anything bad about you. Jennifer, I said quietly. I knew I had to run away. He was crazy, and I knew that one day he would either hit me so hard that I would end up in the hospital or just kill me. I called my father and cried into the phone, asking him to save me. He came with my 2 uncles and a few of his friends. My ex-husband even tried to fight off all of them. But pushing and slapping a woman is one thing, but fighting with men is another. Or with a man, since my father knocked him out. With one punch, then they tied him up in a chair while they helped me pack up. We immediately went to the police and got a restraining order and a restraining order against him. I got divorced 7 years ago, and he doesn't know where I am. I barely know. I met someone, Mark. I was afraid for a long time. She raised her eyes, looking at me. And then I met you, and I had feelings that I hadn't had for so long. I never felt them for him. She was driving the car, but couldn't control it, so I offered to take her home. As I pulled up to the apartment complex, I realized that this was the complex that I had also looked at before choosing my current place to live. After ushering her inside, she opened the front door and hesitated. I made the decision for her, pulling her closer and kissing her again. I had a wonderful evening. Jennifer, I'd love to do it again. On the week? Any night you choose. I'm a pretty good cook if you want to join me for dinner. Tell me the day and I'll bring something too. I'm a good cook too. She smiled as she replied, well, I'll cook first, and then you cook for me, and we'll compare. What day? Wednesday, Mark, although I expect your usual evening call. And lots of messages. She kissed me again. Play your cards right, and you might even get a surprise or 2 in the message. What are you doing tomorrow? Nothing. Why don't we go to the beach? You just want to see me in a bikini, she thought, and her eyes lit up. Although I'm curious what you look like in little swim trunks. Just text me when you can pick me up. I kissed her again and somehow managed to force myself to head towards the stairs. When I got home, I heard my phone ring a couple of times, not opening it until I was inside and sat on the couch with a beer in my hand. Jay, I had a wonderful evening, Mark. Jay, part of me wanted you to stay with me tonight, but I don't want to rush. I don't want to rush things either. Jay, when you're here on Wednesday night, bring a change of clothes. I want you to stay, but it's too early for anything more than sleeping in the same bed, Mark. I'm tired of sleeping alone, Jennifer. Jay, me too. I'm already in bed. It's a big bed, but it seems empty. I didn't feel this until I met you. I'll pick you up at 9 a.m. First breakfast, and then to the beach. Jay, what's your favorite color? Usually blue. The woman is wearing either black or red. Jay, I have the perfect bikini for you. See you in the morning, Mark. Sweet dreams, beauty. Her last message was in the form of a heart. Arriving at her apartment the next morning, she called me upstairs, knocking on her door and hearing her call me inside. I was wearing a rather tight t-shirt and shorts. Hands on hips, she smiled at me. What do you think? Do you have a broom? I'll have to keep all the men away. Her smile widened before she disappeared, returning in a t-shirt and shorts. After packing my bag, I put it in the trunk of my car next to mine and took it to a cafe near the beach for a simple but satisfying breakfast. By the time we were ready to sunbathe, the beach had already started to fill up. After asking me to apply cream on her, she admitted that she liked to be in the sun, but did not strive for a tan. She moaned more than once as I rubbed the cream in, enjoying the blush on her cheeks when I applied it to her back. Jennifer, are you implying that you like this? I whispered in her ear. You have strong hands, Mark, and it was very nice. She responded in kind, her soft hands sliding down my back, her chin eventually resting on my chest, her breasts pressing against me from behind as she hugged me. I turned to kiss her, and she was underneath me pretty quickly, I eventually broke the kiss as there were families nearby, resting on my towel as she continued to lie on her stomach. Her eyes were covered with sunglasses, but the smile on her face could not be hidden. We spent the entire day on the beach, hitting the water several times. Wrapping her legs around me, we started kissing again, and she definitely noticed how turned on I was, enjoying her sigh as she rubbed herself against me. She was turned on and needed something more. After applying more cream, we stayed there until late evening as the sun began to set, wearing our t-shirts as the weather cooled down. After gathering her things and holding hands, she cuddled up to me as we walked back to my car. Arriving at her apartment, I helped carry her bag upstairs. "Want to stay for a drink?" "I would like to, but if I stay, I won't want to leave." She came up to me and kissed me. "Come home, change your clothes, come have a drink, and stay the night." I'm sure I broke a dozen traffic laws while driving home, ran inside and threw my things, quickly packed my bag, grabbed everything I needed, and raced back to her. When I knocked on the door, out of breath, she opened it and laughed at me as I caught my breath. Grabbing me by the t-shirt, she pulled me inside, slammed the door, and then pushed me onto the couch. She immediately sat on my lap, helping me take off my t-shirt. "Fuck," I moaned. "Be nice to me," she whispered. "I don't want to rush things. Mark, I can't do this again. We have all the time you need. Jennifer." "Call me Jenny," with an I, not a Y. We both warmed up before she reluctantly pulled away, disappearing to put on her pajamas. I smiled as she looked visibly embarrassed, cuddling up to me as we enjoyed a couple of drinks and watched a bit of TV. Although we continued to talk about everything under the sun, it was not very late when she got up and led me to the bedroom. There were paintings on the walls, and on the chest of drawers there were many soft toys. "Well, now I know how to surprise you. I love flowers too, and chocolate." Climbing under the sheets, she pressed her back to me. Within a couple of minutes, I felt her trembling. Asking her to turn over, she pressed herself against me, hugging me. She fell asleep within a couple of minutes. I stayed awake a little longer, watching her sleep. She looked so peaceful and so beautiful. I knew how incredibly lucky I was to have such a person in my life. The next morning, she made us breakfast, and we spent the entire day just lazily relaxing in her apartment. Any silences were comfortable, and we filled those moments with lots of hugs and kisses. We teased each other constantly, but I was ready to wait for her. When she sat on my lap for the last time before leaving that evening, she seemed almost to give in to temptation before I quietly told her to stop. "Take your time, Jenny," I whispered. "We have our whole lives ahead of us." I already knew that I was in love with her, and I had a feeling that she felt the same. The only problem I saw was that I was hoping this wasn't just a rebound from a previous relationship. I had just left my wife of 20 years and fell in love with the first woman I met. But I wanted to believe that it was fate that brought us together. There was a reason we met that day in the supermarket. We didn't text constantly during the day given her busy teaching job, but we talked every night. The guys at work knew I was now seeing someone, while I kept my family in Sydney informed that I had met a special woman. My father called and kept me updated on Kylie's affairs. It turns out she was on the verge of moving out. She was still trying to find me, but no one told her anything. She thought I was still in Sydney, so she was hoping to run into me by chance. Wednesday couldn't come soon enough. Jennifer prepared a delicious dinner that was delicious and filling, but I was especially blown away by the dessert she prepared for us. Rubbing my belly after we finished, I said, "They say the way to a man's heart is through his stomach." Jennifer grinned back at me. Moving my chair closer, I put my hand on her bare thigh. Since she was wearing a dress, she looked into my eyes with a look that made me wonder what I would do next. As I slowly moved up her thigh, I felt her spread her legs slightly. "Are we just going to sleep together tonight, Jenny?" I asked quietly. No, Mark." We cleaned up everything after dinner together before she dragged me into the bedroom. Slowly undressing each other, We didn't stop until we were both naked. That night, we made love. The next morning, I woke up on my back with her pressed against me, arm across my chest, leg bent and laying across my legs. She woke up and kissed me on the cheek. "I love you," she whispered. As I turned to kiss her, I couldn't help but smile. "I love you too," I whispered back. "Isn't it too early?" "There's no such thing as too soon, Jenny. If that's how we feel about each other, then that's how it is." I felt it on my first coffee date. I knew I had met the man I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. She took my hand and kissed me again. "And I mean, if you want to be closer to your kids, I'll come with you." "Are you sure? This is a big decision." "There's nothing keeping me here, Mark. My parents are still in good shape. My sister is happily married. I won't rush into a decision now, but my heart says to go with you. I'd like to meet your children. They'll be here for Christmas. Then you all will come and celebrate Christmas with my family." She visited my apartment for the first time that evening. She called it a bit bachelor, but it was clean and tidy, although she understood why I kept it simple, since it was only a temporary place where I lived. After I cooked her dinner, hearing the eating noises she made in bed the night before, I knew I had made an impression with my cooking skills. "Jenny, I don't remember the last time I felt so much love for Kylie. I'm not saying this because she broke my heart and cheated on me. Maybe we were just coasting along these years. Maybe because it's new. Maybe because I'm older and have more life experience. But I absolutely fucking love you, Jennifer Morris. And one day soon I want to be Jennifer Williams," she whispered back. Life was bliss for the next few weeks. We did not separate for a single night. I must admit, we spent more nights in her apartment than in mine, since she had a much more pleasant place to live. She spoke to my dad on the phone several times while I kept my kids in the loop, but they didn't want to talk until they met her in person. I called my son a week before Christmas and asked about his mother and what she was doing. I told her I wouldn't be home for Christmas. "I think she realized you're not in Sydney. Lottie hates her, Dad. I mean, real hate. She's spoken to her once since you left. And after that conversation, I almost stopped contacting her. I talked to your sister last night. She'll be here in a couple of days." "What about Grandpa and Naomi?" "I'll meet them when I get back to Sydney. Jenny will probably come with me. We'll just have to find her a job and buy a house as close as possible so she doesn't have to travel as much." "Are you sure you don't want to stay here, Dad? Lottie and I have discussed, and we're both considering moving here to be closer to you. I know your sister is thinking about it too." Jennifer listened and took my hand, giving it a squeeze. "Are you sure, Steve? You'll be leaving all your friends and family behind. You're more important, Dad. Trust me, when Lottie comes over in a couple of days, she'll talk about it. And her husband is for it too. He hates living in Sydney these days." I looked at Jennifer, not hiding my surprise. "I still have to go back to finalize the divorce. Don't make any hasty decisions, Steve. I know how it sounds, but my decision to leave your mother was well thought out." "Oh, I totally get that, Dad. As much as I care, screw her. She's still trying to convince people that she didn't do anything wrong and that it's your fault for leaving." Jennifer went with me to the airport the day my daughter arrived. She brought her husband Tom, but as soon as Charlotte saw me, she dropped her things and ran to me. It was like those days when I picked her up from school, but as soon as Charlotte saw me, she dropped her things and ran to me. It was like those days when I would pick her up from school and she would be very happy to see me. She cried again for a few minutes, and when I introduced her to Jennifer, they both soon burst into tears. I looked at each other with Tom and shrugged helplessly. The next day, my son surprised me by knocking on my apartment door. "Dad," he exclaimed before we hugged. The bastard caught me well. We both had to wipe our cheeks as I took him inside to introduce him to Jennifer. "Well, at least he looks just like you," she stated. I knew what she meant, but I had already had a DNA test done. Kylie didn't cheat on me so early in our relationship, but I still needed that reassurance. On Christmas morning, Jennifer woke up in my arms. Someone knocked on the door. "Stop fooling around, Daddy." Jennifer hugged me tighter, clearly embarrassed. I couldn't stop laughing. "I'm making breakfast, and then we need to go to Jennifer's parents." "We'll be out in a minute, honey." I thought she had left before I heard her say, "I'm glad you're happy and with the one you love, Daddy." "Thank you. Expensive." Later that morning, I took the five of us to Jennifer's parents. The trunk was filled with gifts, and they were all carried. Her mother fell in love with my daughter within 2 minutes, and I'm pretty sure my son was adopted as one of their own grandchildren, just like they adopted me as their son. I called my dad via an online video service so we could exchange Christmas greetings. My brother, his wife, my sister, and her husband, and their children spent Christmas with him. Kylie left our previous home a long time ago and moved in with her parents. The news that really surprised me was that her affair partner was kicked out of the house by his wife, who used evidence to ensure he was fired for gross misconduct. Apparently, my wife held on to her job as best she could, but she was demoted from a management position and lost quite a few mutual friends who could not forgive her for cheating on me. It was a wonderful day, and my kids took lots of photos for their social media accounts. I had long since lost interest in anything like this, considering it a waste of time, but I soon received messages from several old friends who contacted my father, asking if he knew my phone number. Many people were curious about what happened, so I kept my answer simple. Others gave me information about Kylie, even though I told them it simply didn't matter. After 12 months, I would file for divorce and return to Sydney only to see it completed. Christmas with Jennifer and her family was fantastic. When she mentioned coming to Sydney with me, I informed her that we would be staying in Adelaide and someone from my family would join us instead. Her face lit up, and I almost made her cry when I finally gave her the gift she wanted. It was too early to propose considering I was still technically married, so I bought her a gorgeous necklace and bracelet combination. She immediately put them on and whispered that she would wear them as often as possible. After we had lunch, her father offered me a beer, and we ended up in his garage, where his old sports car was sitting, taken off the wheels. I haven't seen Jenny this happy in a long time. Mark, part of me thinks that escaping Adelaide will be good for her. But would you be happy to stay here forever? I would stay here for her, and my kids will both move here to be closer. How long will it take for your divorce to be finalized? A few months at most. I was honest with Jenny about everything from the beginning. I take it she did you dirty? Yeah, maybe up to 6 months, although I only had concrete evidence in the last few weeks before I pulled the pin. He shook his head. Damn, I read about all this cheating nonsense. Why get married at all if you can't keep your legs closed or keep your dignity in your pants? Have you ever heard of cuckolding? The look of disgust on his face said he knew exactly what it was. Yes, I'm not sure if this is what Kylie meant, but it's one of these new bullshit things going on. Same thing with all these poly people and wanting an open relationship so they can cheat while still maintaining their conscience. Honestly, my wife asked anyone because of this on my part. Well, then I would have ended up in jail. It's so disrespectful to even ask someone to do that. Jenny's ex-husband was both cheating and abusive. What? He put his hand on my shoulder. She barely knew about the betrayal because it was violence that she needed to escape from. But he slept with everyone. She just didn't bother to mention it because violence was something she dealt with on a daily basis. He squeezed my shoulder. She loves you, Mark. Just don't break her heart. Please, I'm not sure I can handle another call like this from my little girl. He took a sip from the bottle, looking away, and added quietly, I almost killed him, Mark. He hurt my little girl. The only person who stopped me from killing him was her. She didn't want to see her father behind bars. I love her more than anything in the world, Dad. He smirked, already calling me son. I have suffered greatly myself, so we both carry wounds in our hearts and souls. We help heal each other. We stayed late. My daughter drove us home because I drank too much. Back at my apartment, my kids went to bed and Jennifer dragged me into our bedroom. If it was good, then she liked New Year's Eve even more. I told my kids to have fun while I took her to a hotel downtown. After dinner and drinks, I walked her back to our room where a bottle of champagne and snacks were chilling. But she knew what we were here for, helping her take off her dress, enjoying the underwear she was wearing. We made love all night. After a couple of hours, we finally stopped and Jennifer snuggled up to me as always. "Any wishes for the new year?" I asked. "More than one. Do you want to hear them?" "Certainly." "I want you to live here with me." "Made." "I want you to propose to me as soon as your divorce is approved." "I'm already looking at rings." She held me tighter. "I want a baby," she whispered. "Stop taking the pills as soon as we're ready." She looked at me in surprise. I couldn't help but smile. "Jennifer, we are going to get married and start a family. I'll throw them out in the morning of the day we decide to start trying. Although I'll need to talk to my doctor about it, I'll let you know when I'm fertile." My children left a couple of days later. I hated leaving them, but once I explained that I would probably stay in Adelaide if they joined me, they promised to start looking at their options. I called my father and told him the same thing. He told me to make the best choices for myself, but he was happy where he was with Naomi, but he would definitely come see me when he could. The next few months were blissful. I eventually quit and moved in with Jennifer. I won't say that it was a fairy tale romance. This is real life, but I couldn't remember when I was happier. We were a real team in everything that concerned our lives. She knew that the specter of my divorce was still hanging in the air, and sometimes it was still on my mind. We both still had trust issues, but we agreed to always talk about any problems we had, even though neither of us gave the other any reason to think we were doing anything wrong. Our sex life was great, and we never stopped dating. We did almost everything together, and I just couldn't get enough of her. Just being in her presence made me happier. She made me want to be a better man, a perfect man in her eyes. As for Jennifer, she showed me so much love that I had already bought an engagement ring by the time I was ready to return to Sydney. She was more nervous than I was during the flight because she knew there were still potential banana peels waiting for us. My father met us at the airport with my siblings and children. We will stay with my father until the divorce is settled. I have already filed the papers, but my lawyer has already informed me that Kylie is trying to contest the divorce. Sitting in his office with Jennifer, I was amazed that she was even trying to stop it. "I have not seen her for 12 months, I stated. "I followed the letter of the law. I can even prove that I have been living in Adelaide for the last year, and she has not lived with me during that time. In fact, we have had no communication at all." "While that is true, she still has the right to challenge it," he replied. "No judge will actually listen to her arguments, and no counseling will be required. I assume Jennifer is your partner." "Kylie's cheating was the original reason. Now I have a better reason to divorce her. Once we get divorced, I will propose to Jenny, and we will get married as soon as possible. We plan to have kids as soon as the divorce is granted," Jennifer added. "I kicked the pills a few weeks ago. I'm hoping that having sex to celebrate when he gets the divorce will lead to my pregnancy." "Okay, I'll talk to her lawyer and find out what she wants. She can't really do much, but a smart lawyer could try to fight." Staying with our father did not limit our sex life. In fact, my father was an old lecher. He might have been closer to 70. Naomi was 5 years his junior, but I'm sure I heard them making love at least one evening. Jennifer simply said it was kind of cute that they were still so attracted to each other. I hugged her and agreed. Then we also made love. 3 days later, my lawyer called me. "Kylie will sign the divorce agreement, so it will be a joint statement, and therefore will be completed without delay if I agree to speak to her one last time." I discussed this with Jennifer, who supported me no matter what I chose. My lawyer suggested that I just talk to her so that everything could be worked out. My father actually agreed. "You're with Jennifer now, son," he said. "You're going to get married, start a new family, and your kids will soon be with you in Adelaide. Are you still mad at her?" "Not really. I'm moving on." "She probably isn't. It's her own fault, and I understand why you don't even want to see her. But let her have her say, and then just leave it behind. Okay, I'll talk to my lawyer and ask him to sort everything out." The next week, we found ourselves at the courthouse. My lawyer explained that once the meeting was over and she signed the documents, the judge was ready to sign off on our divorce, and I would be a free man 1 month and 1 day after the judge ruled on the divorce. I haven't seen Kylie since the night she went on her date. She was waiting in the room as Jennifer, and I approached my lawyer. He explained that Kylie was inside with her lawyer and no one else was there. Taking Jennifer's hand, I led her and my lawyer in the room. Kylie looked up in shock to see me walking in with another woman. I barely looked at her as I sat Jennifer down in the empty seat, pulling it out as always, checking to see if she was comfortable before I sat down on the chair in the middle with my lawyer to my left. Taking Jennifer's left hand in my right, I made sure our hands were on the table in plain sight. She added to this by moving her chair as close to mine as possible, resting her head on my shoulder. I finally looked at Kylie. She looked like crap, to be honest. I've heard often enough that life hasn't been easy since I left her. I had no sympathy. She made a choice that cost her everything. No communication with my daughter at all. Our son hardly spoke to her at all. My entire family cut off all contact with her. And from what I heard, even her own family was disappointed, but felt they would have to take her in when my father kicked her out of the house. "Okay, Kylie, have your say so we can end this divorce. I have a life that I would like to continue. You are the past to which you firmly belong." "Who is she?" she asked quietly. "Train. The woman is on your side. This is Jennifer Morris. As soon as our divorce is finalized, I will propose to her, and soon she will become Jennifer Williams. And I will naturally answer yes to his proposal, since I want nothing more than to be his wife and the mother of his future children." I smiled for a moment, although I didn't take my eyes off Kylie. "Once she says yes, we will organize a simple wedding ceremony. With any luck, by the time we get married, she will also be carrying our child." I knew it would hurt to hear all this. I still knew that I would soon become an ex-wife, and the pain in her eyes was real. "You've progressed quite quickly," she stated. "It wasn't me who cheated, Kylie. It was you. I remember leaving evidence. You never let me explain. I went out that night, and you didn't say anything. You didn't fight for me. I didn't have to fight for you because I was your damn husband. So in the end, you weren't worth fighting for. You cheated on me, Kylie. You showed your true colors after 20 years of marriage. Remember our conversations about monogamy and fidelity. I warned you that if you turn out to be like my mother, I will leave without any hesitation. You just made my decision easier. Dawn, I won't answer this question because it's not true. Your only regret is that you got caught, not that you proved our marriage was nothing more than a goddamn scam, and you're a worthless bitch, just like my own mother." Her lawyer cleared his throat. I looked at him fiercely. "Fuck off if you don't like what I say." "She wants to talk, okay? I also have the right to speak." I was mistaken. Betrayal is not a mistake. Cheating is a series of decisions you made. It was just sex. Here it comes, a phrase many bitches use to justify their decision. Sorry, but most people associate sex with love, and considering you were my wife, I should have been the one you had sex with, not some creature you work with. We also discussed this before our wedding, Kylie. Again, I warned you what would happen if you cheated on me. The thing is, you forgot that my mother cheated. As soon as I pulled my head out of my ass, I realized what you were doing, so it was just collecting evidence. If you had said no that night, would you still have left? Yes, I would have left anyway. I wouldn't have left the same way. However, what you did that night was so disrespectful that you deserved everything that happened after. You took all our money. Consider this compensation for 20 wasted years. I stopped and shook my head. No, that's not entirely fair and not entirely correct. You gave me our 2 children. It wasn't wasted. I also made sure they were mine. This upset her. I never cheated on you then. No, you just became an easy girl later. You sold our house. No, I gave it to my father. It's still in his name and he's renting it out. He already told me he'll sell it and give me most of the money so I can buy another house where I live now. You didn't even give me a chance, Mark. Because you don't deserve it. Kylie, where do you live now? It's none of your business. I don't want you to know this information. The day I left, you stopped being important to me. Our children have grown up and can choose who they want to be with on special days, be it birthdays or holiday periods. She fell silent because she knew that nothing she said would change my mind. Just sign the papers and move on, Jennifer stated. He hasn't seen or spoken to you in 12 months. He's moving on. He loves me and I love him. We're going to get married and have our own family and grow old together. You threw it away. I'm glad that I caught him, held him, whispered that everything would be fine and I would never let him down. He owns my heart, and I know that I own him. I didn't mean to. She met my gaze, and I saw tears. I kept my face still. Tears won't work on me this time. I still love you, Mark. Good for you. I don't care, Kylie, I replied coldly. The tone made her almost jump. I don't hate you anymore. Don't be fooled by the cold tone. I just don't care about you. You stopped being my problem the day you let another man fuck you. We sat in silence until her lawyer finally cleared his throat. Kylie, it's clear this isn't going anywhere, her lawyer said. Just sign the papers and end this farce. He's made it clear he's going to get married again. No judge worth his salt is going to stand in the way of that. Your marriage, it's over. Your children have grown up. You have no more common assets. It's all over. Sign the papers and move on. He took the papers out of the folder and placed them in front of her, offering her a pen. Kylie met my gaze, and at that moment she began to cry. I knew her well enough to know that she was genuinely upset. Rubbing her cheeks, she took the offered pen with a trembling hand and glanced at the documents. At the bottom she signed and dated the papers. Is my presence necessary in court? I asked my lawyer. No, Mark. You can go. You will receive the order of divorce in the mail. Great. Then we're done here. Getting up, Jennifer took my hand and I led her out of the room. I'm sorry, Mark, I heard her cry. I will always love you. I appreciated the apology, even though it meant nothing more to me. It was too little, too late. But as for those last 3 words, I'm sure she still loved me, but I didn't care. The woman I loved was currently holding my hand, and in a month and a few days she would become my bride. Walking outside and down the street, my dad, Naomi, Steve, and Charlotte were waiting for us at the coffee shop. With a gesture of my head, I indicated that we were moving on to the nearest pub, as I wanted a drink. After purchasing a round of drinks, we sat down at the table and I recounted the conversation. They smiled as he admitted that he probably talked more, saying everything he wanted to say. How did she look? Charlotte asked. Like crap. Definitely looked older than her age. Definitely worth the upgrade, Jennifer whispered in my ear. Did she sign the papers? Asked my father. Nodding, we knocked glasses and drank beer. I went through the same shit with your mother. I'm sure everything Kylie told you is what she was trying to tell me. Was she trying to blame me? Steve asked. Yeah, the old "it was just sex" line. What the hell is with these slutty women who claim it was just sex? Charlotte wondered almost to herself. I married my husband, and I wouldn't dream of cheating on him just for sex. If I want sex, I'll go to my husband and make sure he fucks me senseless when I'm horny. She stopped and blushed, realizing that she had just said that in front of her father and grandfather. We looked at each other and burst out laughing. "Well said, girl. Well said," exclaimed my father. "And words to live by. Every time I feel horny, your grandfather doesn't stand a chance," Naomi stated. "And if he needs a little chemical help, he knows there are other uses." "Naomi, this is my grandfather," exclaimed Charlotte. "He's not dead, and neither am I. I'm 65 years old and still quite capable of good sex," Naomi retorted. "Your grandfather met me at the right age. He was still a lecher, and I was almost constantly horny. But as soon as we met, we made a promise to each other to treat each other well. We both experienced failed marriages due to cheating. I'm just glad it's almost over," I admitted. "I don't like that I'm just another divorcee, but as I said in the room, cheating is unforgivable. Honestly, those who decide to deal with this have nothing but praise. Maybe if your children were 10 years younger, I would have felt trapped. But then I looked at my father. It was difficult, but he always had my support." We stayed in Sydney for a couple more days while I talked to my family about their plans. Charlotte and Tom immediately agreed to come to Adelaide. Stephen was still evaluating his options, but would likely join us. To my surprise, my sister suggested that she too come with us. Having dinner with her when she arrived alone, I learned that her marriage was also over. "You can stay with us until you figure this out," Jennifer offered. "Any family is welcome. You're my family now, and my family is yours now, too. I'm selling a house here, and we'll make a lot of money from it," I added. "House prices in Adelaide are much more reasonable than here, so we're going to buy a bigger property." "With rooms to fill with little people," Jennifer suggested, taking my hand and placing it on her stomach. "Soon I will be carrying our first child." "How many children do you want, Mark?" "As much as you want, Jenny. I love being a dad." A month later, I received an order of divorce, which stated that my marriage to Kylie Daniels, since she did not keep my family name, was officially dissolved. I never heard from her again, but through the grapevine I learned that she left Sydney 6 months after our divorce was approved. From what Stephen told me, since he was the only one still speaking to her, she headed north to Queensland to start over. After that, I just stopped asking, and Stephen stopped telling me, because I no longer cared what she did. 2 days after receiving the divorce order, I proposed to Jennifer on the beach in front of our families. She could barely say a word and nodded as I placed the engagement ring on her finger. 6 months later, we got married on the same beach as our new home was just a few hundred meters away. As she walked toward me in her wedding dress, my future wife simply beamed as her father walked her toward me. Taking her hand, none of us could stop smiling, turning to face the triumphant one. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today. I'm a year away from retirement and life couldn't be better. Jennifer and I have been married for almost 20 years, and today we are as happy as the day we met, our first date, our first love. All these first events leading up to our wedding day." 6 months after returning to Adelaide after a trip to Sydney, my daughter and son were living in Adelaide. My daughter is still married to Tom, and I have 3 grandchildren. My son is married to a wonderful man, and they have adopted 2 children. My father and Naomi joined us in Adelaide a year after the divorce, where he lived for almost 10 years before passing away peacefully in his sleep. Naomi was heartbroken, and the first thing we did was insist that she come live with us. She resisted for a while until she realized our house was huge, and we eventually built her a granny flat so she could still be independent. My sister joined us in Adelaide almost immediately after her husband left, taking her children with her. Like her brother, she was the victim of betrayal, and he did not fight her when she took his children. We found her a place to live after she had been with us for a couple of months. She eventually married one of my colleagues and good friends, and they were happily married for 15 years. My brother stayed in Sydney, and he was the only one who kept in touch with our mother. When I was 60, I learned that she had passed away, having had no relationship to speak of with her for nearly 40 years. It was difficult for me to feel any grief upon learning of her death. Jennifer suggested that we still attend her funeral. Again, it was about getting better, so we all flew to Sydney to attend. I was surprised to learn that she remarried and adopted her husband's children as her own. They weren't shocked to learn of our existence, but they were surprised that she didn't admit to being completely estranged from 2 of her 3 children. We could have explained why we broke up, but the funeral was not the right time. We simply stated that we had come to pay our respects before returning home. With no family left in Sydney, within a year my brother joined us in Adelaide. As for Jennifer and I, we ended up having 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. My older daughter and son were thrilled to have siblings and were happy to look after them, even though Jennifer and I went out too often. But we remained deeply in love, always communicated, never went to bed angry, and our sex life remained as vibrant today as it was the first time we slept together. I look back on my life and the time of my divorce. I'm sure there are those who would rather I go scorched earth at my ex-wife. But what would be the point? Leaving without a word actually hurt her a lot more. Nothing but silence on my part for a year before I came back just to make sure the divorce went through. She knew my thoughts about fidelity and broke the contract. As for those who believe in reconciliation, I also cannot agree with this. If your wife cheats and you find the strength to forgive her, then it is your fault. But trust has been damaged, and can it ever be fully restored? I don't believe this is possible. You will spend the rest of your life suspicious and resentful, and divorce is likely inevitable eventually. Instead, I took a road I didn't travel often. There was no real revenge, at least not to the point of burning everything to the ground, but there was no chance of reconciliation. I just left and decided to move on with my life without Kylie. I found Jennifer, my only soulmate. I still maintain that meeting in the supermarket was fate. I'm not religious, but I'm pretty sure there are old world religions that talk about gods of fate. Are you ready, Mark? I turned around and saw my wife looking absolutely gorgeous in a stunning red ball gown. What made me smile was that she lifted the front to show me that she wasn't wearing panties. "It's yours tonight, lover," she whispered. "What about now?" As she approached me, she stopped and leaned down to kiss me. I see the old magic is still there. "Have you heard from the children? They're either on their way or about to leave." "And the young ones?" "Everything will be fine without us here for the evening, until they burn the place down. So we have time to fool around." She smiled at me. She pressed herself against me as I held her tightly to my body. "I love you, husband." "I love you, wife." "Many more years of happiness." "Hope so." "Well, maybe we have a few minutes to make love before we have to go. I'll tell the kids we're going to be there for a while. They'll understand why." And she smiled and took my hand, leading me to our bed. This was not the bed on which we first made love, although it was the same bed on which we conceived our 2 children and spent many nights making love for hours. It was never going to be a quick thing if her dress ended up on the floor next to most of my suits. And once we were completely naked, we couldn't help but smile at each other. "Damn it, we're just going to be late," she moaned. "I still can't say no to it after all these years." At least this old man still had it. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.